Hello, again, this is Generational Ministries, and I am your host and author, Sandra Fitzgerald. Today's lesson is entitled, Let the Sun Shine In. So we'll begin. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of the Lord moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, Let there be light, and there was light. Let's pause for a moment and try to absorb the full impact of that statement. Think about being in total darkness. Most of us have experienced that. Perhaps we've been at home in our dens or basement and suffered a power outage. Suddenly, everything is black. We can't see our hand in front of our face. We stumble around in the darkness, trying to orient ourselves, but to no avail. Suddenly, the lights blink back on. The brightness is so intense. After all, we've been in the dark. That is a shock to our systems when the light comes back on. The light hurts our eyes that have been adjusted or grown accustomed to being in the dark. With the return of power, we notice things we'd forgotten while in the dark, even if it was for a short while. We had forgotten we left the TV on or the radio playing, and it's a shock to our system to suddenly be confronted with the sights and sounds that we had forgotten all about while we were in the dark. We have also had to reset our clocks. It seems time loses meaning in the dark. But now that we have light, we have to play catch up. Being in the dark changes our perspective. Darkness harbors fears and uncertainty. We really know what to expect when the light comes back on, but while in the dark, we have no clue. Darkness carries a suffocating quality. Every breath seems to get caught in lungs that are only partially functioning due to the uncertainty of the situation. It says every one of our strength is simply focused on surviving the darkness. And then there was light. Thank God for the light. There's a freedom and openness in the light. Gone is the fear of uncertainty. We can see our way clear. We adjust to the new brilliance and move forward with life. We now have a new appreciation of that light. Having spent time in the darkness, we can give thanks for the light. In this lesson, we'll be talking about people being flooded with the light of Jesus, the Son of God. There were many people in the Bible days that experienced darkness in their lives that was only relieved by a word or a touch from Jesus. With permission of the Holy Spirit, we will be taking literary license and some God-given imagination to illustrate the intense beauty of walking in the light of Jesus' love after being trapped in darkness for a while. Perhaps you too remember when your life was filled with darkness. You will be able to relate to the people we have chosen for this lesson. Perhaps you will be encouraged to bless God for the light as you remember when you were trapped and surrounded by dark circumstances in your past. Or maybe some of you are experiencing darkness right now. Be encouraged. The sun always comes. We learned in grade school that the sun is always shining. Clouds just pass over from time to time. Even in the darkest night, the sun is always shining. Just hold on a little while. God is going to blow your mind and shock your system with the power of His love by His Son, Jesus Christ. But there's a catch. Each and every one must open your heart and your mind, and let the sun shine in. He's not like the natural sun that shines on everybody. We must allow him to shine in the dark places of our life by accepting his teachings and believing what he says is true. The sun we're talking about is Jesus, the Son of God. Jesus is the true light. Listen to this account of John chapter 1, verse 9. That was the true light which lighted every man that comes into the world. Now verse 12 of the same chapter. But as many as received him, to them he gave the power to become sons of God, even to them that believe on his name. This plainly shows us the choice lies with us. We can receive the Son and walk in the light, or we can reject him and his teachings and stumble around in the dark. It's up to us. With having said that, let's examine the lives of some people who chose the light. We will paint a portrait of them in darkness, and we will try to imagine what they must have felt like after being exposed to the brilliant light of Jesus' love. The first one comes from Matthew 8, verses 1 through 4. The first witness of the light would be a man suffering with leprosy. Listen to his account of life in darkness before his collision with the light. This is him speaking. I have been cursed with a withering disease, where there was once clean skin, now white flesh so damaged with decay that I have lost feeling in much of my body. He lifts up his hand for us to see. I knew there was no cure. I had seen many other people that I am forced to live with lose their fingers. They just rotted off. I tried to feel sorry for them, but all I could think about was the day when I too would lose my fingers. I had already begun to smell the rotted flesh while sitting there in the cave in the dark. Many days we went hungry, and we were so alone. You see, we were not allowed to socialize with others for fear of spreading the disease. There was no cure. The situation was hopeless. Much of our time was spent on the outskirts of civilization, trying to catch a little conversation from people that passed us by. That's how I heard about the man they called Jesus. One day I noticed a large crowd of people coming down from the mountain close to where I was staying, and I saw him. It was something about him that drew me closer. Just the very presence of him broke something inside of me, and I ran and threw myself at his feet. Right then and there, I knew my dark days of fear were over. I believed this man had the power to heal my diseased body. He didn't shrink away as I knelt there. So many others drew back once they saw I was a leper, but not him. He reached out his hand and actually touched me, and I was immediately cleansed. I will never forget the day that I took a risk to receive the man named Jesus into my heart. As I worshiped him, he flooded my life with the light of healing, and I was never the same again. Gone was the darkness, the fear, and the uncertainty. I was a new man. Offering my gift at the temple, I had long been denied the right to enter. Now I was walking in the light. How about that? That is a wonderful testimony of the light of God. Now our next witness comes from Matthew 9, verses 20 through 22. She was a woman who had suffered from a bleeding disorder. Here's her account. I was weak and weary, tired and drained from the constant flow of blood that just wouldn't stop. I tried to deal with it as best I could, going from one doctor to another. Finally, my funds ran out. I really wasn't healthy enough to work effectively to support my needs. Looking back on those days, I wondered how I got through. Many days my head ached from dizziness and I felt lightheaded and weak from the loss of blood. Tiredness and depression were my constant companions for 12 long years. Have any of you ever been sick and depressed? She asked. Do you know what it's like to exist day after day, week after week, month after month, and year after year, being filled with desperation and fear? I know you have read about my story many times in Matthew, but have you ever thought about what it must have been like to be me? You see, in those days, it was against the law for me to even go out in public with my condition. No man could understand the shame and humiliation of soiling yourself in public. The doctors really didn't know how to treat me, and looking back, I wonder if they really ever cared. I doubt it. When my money ran out, they did too. Then along came Jesus. Oh, I had heard about his healing power. You'd be surprised at how fast news traveled in our time. He was passing through on the very narrow street that I stood on. I could barely see him through the crowd, yet I pressed forward, never taking my eyes off the light that seemed to shine around him and his very presence. It drew me closer and closer. The press was awful. I said to myself, if I could just touch the hem of his clothing, I know I'll be free of this disease. Nobody told me this. It was something in my heart that I knew if I could just touch him, his light would reach into the dark places in my wound and I would be well. I never meant for him to know. I wasn't even supposed to be in the crowd in that condition. Yet I felt I had nothing to lose. Here was my chance at freedom from darkness and depression. So I touched his clothes, not even daring to touch his body. And an amazing thing happened. My whole being was flooded with light. The depression I had felt for 12 years lifted as it had never been. And what's more amazing, he felt my shy, secret touch. I was astonished when he called me forward. In front of all these people, here was Jesus addressing me. And not with cold derision, but with warmth and kindness. I will never forget his words to me that day. He said, "Daughter, be of good comfort. Thy faith has made thee whole." And that day forward, my life has never been the same. Everything was brighter after I took a chance to let the sun shine in. Wow, that was powerful. So our next witness comes from Luke chapter 13, verses 10 through 17. My, what a powerful witness to the light. This lady comes to us from the Sabbath day. And you know they did not believe, they meaning the Jews, did not believe in doing much on the Sabbath. So let's let her tell the story. She begins, "I am still adjusting to the fact that I am able to stand straight up as I tell of my encounter with the light. You see, I had been crippled for 18 years. For 18 long years, I was the brunt of bad jokes and stares as I made my way through the streets that always seemed crowded. Imagine the heat and dust from the ground just about choking me as I made my way. Little children pointed and laughed at me. Some of you probably can relate to being different. It's probably still going on today. Adults shoved their way past me many times, knocking my possessions out of my hands, uncaring of someone like me. After all, what could I do about it? It's not like I could retaliate. I couldn't even straighten up. All that changed, however, on a Sabbath day long ago. You all now refer to that day as Saturday, but we Jews call it the Sabbath, the day set aside for worship. And in my day, it was taken to the extreme. You couldn't do much of anything. You would be breaking the law if you lifted your own child if they weighed a certain amount. My people were strict to the point of obsession about observing the Sabbath. To make matters worse, Jesus picks this day in front of the synagogue rulers to shine his light on me. When he looked over and saw my situation, he spoke 7 words I'll never forget. Woman, thou art loose from thine infirmity. Tears still run down my face as those words ring over and over in my soul. Never had I felt such freedom. That was the first time in a long time I truly felt like worshiping in the synagogue. And I showed it. I praised and I thanked God right then and right there. The ruler of the synagogue said Jesus had disgraced the Sabbath by healing me, but he soon had him in his place by labeling him a hypocrite, because if his animal was stalled up in the Sabbath with no water, he would lose him. Well, shouldn't I, who was better than a beast, be set free as well? I just listened as Jesus berated him. My heart was not focused on the disgruntlement of the ruler. It was basking in the light that was now flooding my soul. I haven't been the same since. I will always remember that Sabbath when I stood upright and walked and praised in the light. Wow, that was powerful. Our next witness probably didn't spend much time in the synagogue. In fact, her time was spent sneaking around in shame and hiding in the shadows of humanity. She didn't have many girlfriends. She was shunned and cut off from the clique. Yet the sun managed to find her on one of these lonely days. Listen as she gives an account of the day her life changed forever. I am from a place called Samaria. We were always shunned by the Jews for reasons that go way back. One day I was going to the well to draw some water. You may have heard of it. It's called Jacob's Well. On this particular day, a man happened to be sitting there. He was a Jew. It was a hot day, and he seemed tired. As I drew closer to him, I was amazed that he didn't turn away or run me off. You see, Jews and Samaritans didn't mix or socialize. And to top it off, he asked me for a drink of water. I noticed there was something different about him, much different than any man I had known, and sadly I had known my share. In him, I sensed a drawing presence, and in spite of my reservations, I found myself in an intense conversation with him. I really don't think he wanted any water. He didn't have anything to draw it with. I sensed he was wanting something else from me. Not the usual thing men wanted from me, but something else. Many of you women can relate. You think you've met the one, only to find out he was no better than the last man you were with. And I was on my 5th empty relationship. But as I said, this man was different. He began telling me things about myself that he couldn't have known. And he was telling me about water that once drank, a person would never thirst again. He held me captive with his conversation. I was totally taken aback when he told me to go get my husband. I was tempted to lie and pretend I didn't understand what he said, but I decided to answer honestly and told him I didn't have one. I was surprised when he said he already knew it and proceeded to talk to me about my past. My past wasn't one of a physical infirmity like the other women. My soul had been darkened by a lifestyle of promiscuity. Until that day at the well, I didn't realize with each man I had been with, I lost a piece of myself. And how many times can a woman put back the piece of a soul that was torn and misused by a parade of men in and out of her life? I had become an outcast from my own self until that day at the well. That man shined a light in my soul that eliminated my whole life. My life changed that day when he taught me about who I was and who I could be, and I accepted what he said about the living water and drank from it and went to town and told others, and their lives were changed as well. Yes, the sun was hot and bright that day at the well, but the Messiah shone in my life brighter than any star that day, and I haven't been the same since then. I no longer need the embrace of wrong relationships to satisfy me. I was never satisfied anyway. I belong to him, and I have been walking in the light of his love ever since. There are many, many witnesses to the light, yet time fails to name them all and let them tell their story. Many of them crowd the pages of the Bible, and their stories live on and on in our hearts and minds. Some witnesses received the light are as follows. One man was healed from the palsy. There was a little girl whose laughter echoes through time as the light shone on her lifeless little body, and she was restored back to health. Lazarus is also smiling as he burns his grave clothes, remembering how he felt when he stepped into the light after 4 days in the grave. Many try to press forward to tell their stories. Some were dumb, some had demon possessions, some were unable to walk or move or wasn't right in their mind before the light struck them. A Canaanite woman tells of the time she refused to leave her daughter in darkness and held on to the light of hope, begging and pleading, willing to go the distance and rewarded with the health of her daughter when the light shone on her soul. Listen to Bartimaeus crying loud for the light to shine in his life. Literally, you see, Bartimaeus was blind, yet he remembers the day the clouds broke for him as he sat by the highway begging. The sun stopped still and shined his light on Bartimaeus, and he received his sight. Mary Magdalene witnesses to the light after being refused sunlight, and she was released from the grip of prostitution. The light shone on her at the house of a Pharisee named Simon. She never walked the same again. Her path was bright as she walked in the light of Jesus' forgiveness and his love. She accepted him, and he accepted her. Hers was the first face he saw when he was resurrected from the dead. Another woman of like manner cries out as she remembers when Jesus rescued her from her would-be murderers. She remembers her shame at being caught in the act of adultery, how exposed and embarrassed she felt standing there in front of everybody. The Pharisees hadn't even let her properly cover herself. She remembers standing there, unable to hold her head up as she waits to be stoned to death for adultery. But the light shone for her when Jesus challenges her accusers to hit her, only if they themselves had no sin. Not one rock was thrown. Jesus goes on in that same passage of Scripture in verse 12 to state plainly, I am the light of the world. He that follows me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. We could end our story right here and would have made our point. Yet there is one crying out and won't let us close until he has had his say. He makes his stand from the book of John, chapter 9. He begins like this. I was born blind. I had never seen the rising of the sun or the going down of the same. I had never seen the face of my parents or any of my relatives. I had never seen the temple they say is so beautiful. My whole life has been spent in darkness. I depended on the scraps of others for my living. One day I heard a man's voice declaring he was the light of the world. In my heart, I wanted so much to walk in that light that he spoke of. And while he talked, I didn't realize he had gotten so close to where I was sitting. I gasped as I felt cold clay on my then sightless eyes. Something about his touch reassured me and comforted me. See, I wasn't used to being touched. Most people just dropped a coin here or there, never realizing I was a real person just like them. They mostly ignored me, but not this man. After anointing my eyes, he sent me to wash in the pool of Siloam. I heeded him gladly, and when I came back, I could see. The brilliance of the sun was a shock to my senses. I was almost overwhelmed. Yet, with all of its light and its warmth, the sun paled in comparison to what I already felt from the warmth of his touch. Many people were amazed that day. They demanded answers to questions they couldn't possibly understand. Who was I? How was I healed? Who healed me? I really wasn't concerned with all of that. All I knew was where I was once blind, now I could see. Now you see how bright the love of Jesus is. I urge you to be like me and all of these other witnesses. Come out from whatever darkness you are in and walk in Jesus' marvelous light. Write works about it. Write songs about it. Pen poetry. However you choose to celebrate the light that is always with us. Just tell everybody you know to accept Jesus and his teachings and let the sun shine in. I think that was a beautiful account of people being in the dark, and yet at the touch of Jesus, now they walk in the light. I think all of us have experienced some kind of darkness in our life, just like these people in the Bible. But trust and believe. Once the light of Jesus fills your heart, you'll be a different person. Now that's not to say that you won't make mistakes in your life, but it is to say that you just ask God for forgiveness and continue to strive to be like Christ in your everyday dealings with yourself and other people. You too will feel the light of God's love, which is Jesus Christ, start to permeate every part of your life. Thank you for listening. Again, this has been Generational Ministries with your host, Sandra Fitzgerald. Please tune in again when we have more short stories from the Bible. Thank you.